Good afternoon, Grazia, and thank you very much for giving your time to talk to the Mint today.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you very much for inviting me. I'm delighted. Thank you.
Brilliant. Well, I'd like to start to sort of get us going with asking you how important and different the economics of transnational corporations are, because I know you've said that this is a neglected area which you have focused on.
Well, I think transnational corporations are different from normal firms, not because there is something intrinsically different in them, but because they operate across nation states. And it is this particular feature which gives them advantages in the sense that they can develop specific strategies to take advantage of what's going on within each nation state. Well, I'll give you some example of this. I see a nation state mainly as a set of regulatory institutions, regulatory regimes, and each nation state has its own.
Yes.
And other institutions who can operate across a variety of them can actually take advantages of those differences. What are the regulatory regimes I'm talking about? Well, they are taxation regimes, they are environmental rules, they are rules regarding the labor market and social security. It's from the differences between them that any operator that can work across several of them can take advantage of this.
Yeah.
Transnational corporations do exactly that. Yeah. Particularly the one regarding taxation is the one which hits the headlines. Much less attention is given to two issues which are of interest to me in particular the labor regimes and the regulatory regimes regarding labor law and social security systems.
Okay. Well, before we just go on to the labour law, one thing I know you've commented on is that most of economics ignores this fact. And on the face of it, it seems quite an obvious and sort of immediate fact. So why do you think sort of such mainstream most of economics has actually not factored in this key element into their analysis?
Well, most economics, of course, they deals with the theory of the firm, and then it deals with large firms, market power, and so on. So in many ways, most economists think that actually, yes, okay, transnational corporations are large firms. We deal with issues of market power, barriers to entry, and so on and so forth. So we can deal with that. The problem I'm posing is that in order to analyze the spatial advantages that these firms have, you have to deal with the issue of nation states and what it is, how they differ between them, and how companies that operate across them can have an advantage.
And this has just been missed out as something that...
I think on the whole it has been missed out. On the whole, yes.
You don't think it's something that there's a reason that it's a problematical fact for mainstream economics as such?
Well, I'm afraid it has been missed out both by mainstream and non-mainstream economics.
Right.
Actually, most of the non-mainstream economics does not deal with the multinational companies. The majority of people working in the field, they think it is something which management people and management department deal with, but not economists. Well, I disagree with that, actually. I think we economists have to deal with this, which are the major operator in our economic systems.
When you say they're the major operator, how significant are they, would you say?
Just off my head, but one sticks in my mind. They are 80% of world trade is initiated, directly or indirectly, via transnational companies. So 80% of world trade is the responsibility of transnational companies. And of these, 33% is intra-firm, which is trade between units belonging to the same transnational companies but operating in different countries.
Okay.
So we're talking about...
That is big.
That's big.
Yeah,
it is,
and so for that phenomenon to be ignored in a lot of the analysis, presumably international trade analysis and this sort of area, would seem to be on the face of it pretty problematic.
I think so, yes.
So what difference does it make? For instance, you know, the basic idea of the benefits of free trade and you know, comparative advantage and things like that. Does it make it much difference in that sort of space?
Well, I think so, yes. I think it does, because really, if you wanted to understand the trade patterns, geographical patterns of trade, you really have to look more at things like global value chains, internal to companies. You really have to understand what it is, what are the strategies of companies in locating certain parts of the production process in different countries. And this is where it is a strategic issue which I am very keen on. You have to look at firms, transnational firms, in terms of their ability to develop a variety of strategies which are not open to uninational companies.
And one of this was labour, I suppose.
Particular labour, of course, comes in because in the work which with a colleague we just finished on Fiat, and which is going to appear in the Cambridge Journal of Economics, we analyze this kind of theory based on labour fragmentation in terms of the Fiat company, which we follow for 70 years now.
Oh, right, so you know it well.
So
how has that affected the Fiat company's strategy then?
Well, essentially, what the general theory, which is have been developing through the years, is that transnational companies, by operating in various countries, have extra advantages, and in relation to labor, is one of the advantages is advantages of fragmentation.
And what do you mean by fragmentation? Yeah.
Well, fragmentation of labor, of the labor force.
As opposed to collaboration or collective action.
Fragmentation can be either because of operating in different countries. You see, labor, I mean, if you take Fiat, Fiat started as a company very much concentrated in one country, Italy, and very much with the production process all in-house, all within Fiat.
Yeah.
And then gradually, of course, as it expanded, they were supplying foreign markets via exports, therefore producing in Italy, indeed in Piemonte only, and then exporting to other countries.
Right.
As they grew, and the more and more labor force was concentrated in the Torino area, it was easier for labor to organize it, and therefore then conflicts started. And then Fiat went into two types of what I call fragmentation strategies. One was to locate in different countries, or indeed in different areas of Italy. and they started locating in the south of Italy. So in the first strategy, the workforce from the south of Italy, labor, went to capital, they went to Torino. And that led to an enormous concentration of labor within the same area, which created all sorts of problems, including social problems and overcrowding and so on, but also allowed the labor force gradually to collaborate and organize together. So the response, the strategy of Fiat was first to start investing in the south of Italy, then to invest abroad, and then on the production process side, they started gradually to outsource some of their components. Something which was relatively new for Fiat, and something on which Fiat arrived later than other car manufacturers.
Okay, so what time are we talking?
Well, we're talking now about the 60s, late 50s, 60s, and then it proceeded through the decades, actually. So it's various phases.
And has the opening up of China and so on, has that meant?
Oh yes, very much so, yes. And South America, I mean, Fiat invested quite heavily in South America, but then invested also in other countries in Europe.
And were they explicit about the strategy, that this was about changing their relationship with their workforce, or
no.
What evidence do you have that actually that was their motivation?
Yeah, it's a very good question you're asking. Of course, it's not as simple as that. It's not. No company would be explicit and say we invest there so that our workforce is more fragmented among various countries. But there have been a couple of instances in which the management of Fiat, including some recent ones actually, the management of Fiat more or less said, if you don't accept our contract, the contract which we are proposing to you, and this talking to the trade unions, then the investment which we are planning, instead of going to the south of Italy, will go to Portugal in one case, and the other case it was going to Poland. So it was just quite a stark choice.
And we see that with Brexit at the moment, people saying we're not going to invest here further.
Yes, and it's a reality. It's a reality, and though I don't think we should think in terms of considering these are naughty companies. They are there to do, the business that companies do. The question is, it's the role of governments in all this. And also the role of trade unions. Because why does this international fragmentation happens? Clearly why? Because while labor so far has been quite up to a point, has been able to unite within a nation states, they do not collaborate across nation states. Therefore, there is no reaching out of trade unions.
Have they tried?
Well, I think they're trying, and I think there are signs of success. I'll give you a couple of examples. I think it was in 2015 or 2016. Of all companies, workers in McDonald's managed to organize, the trade unions managed to organize a strike contemporaneously across different countries. Now, McDonald's is a particular example, a particularly important example, because the fragmentation of the labor force there is not just across nation states, it's also by type of organization, by how the labor process is organized. You see, McDonald's operates in various countries via franchises.
Yes.
And therefore, they claim they are not responsible for the labor force.
So that's another dimension to fragmentation.
The one which I mentioned at the very beginning, but perhaps we should talk about it a little bit. Now, they are claiming this is not the labor force is not our responsibility. The unions organizing these strikes claimed that actually the type of contract that McDonald's had with their franchisees meant that they were forced into certain type of labor contract with their own workforce. And the whole thing went actually in the US, they went to the law courts, and actually the trade union won.
They won. I mean, that's interesting because, of course, we see that sort of debate around Uber in terms of
exactly
Uber, what the relationship.
Even Google workers managed to organize a strike across countries, actually. And then the other one was there are. Yeah. I mean, the situation is changing. There are several instances now.
And you think, I mean, we see at the moment the children putting a school strike on around climate change around the world.
That was quite, yes.
So now, with the tools of social media and so forth, you'd think that unions would get better, rather late in the day. Obviously, it's quite a long way behind the organisation of companies. But
yes, I think, but you see, there are challenges for unions, both the technology, as you say, the internet and so on, but also, you see, with the technology, the nature and type of sectors is changing. And the unions in most countries are very much organized along sectors.
Yes.
But in many cases, the sector themselves are old-fashioned. And so the unions may need to rethink all that if they want to be effective. I think we are living an interesting time. The changes in technology and the sort of the, internet, platforms, AI, etc., are actually bringing in some quite important challenges for our view of the firm. First of all, because they are facilitating the outsourcing, not just within a country, but within many countries.
Yes.
And I think this actually challenges the concept of firm in itself. You see, outsourcing can take place in a variety of ways. It can be completely arm's length outsourced, but it can have a sort of a variety of partnerships and equity involvement.
Right.
Up to the point of having no equity involvement whatsoever.
Right.
But nonetheless, some of these partnerships or outsourcing where there is no equity involvement, there is still a very large amount of control by the company, usually a transnational company, over the smaller ones.
Right.
Now, is this still a firm if it controls but does not own an equity in the smaller firm or not? I think this is a challenging issue, isn't it? One thinks of a firm bound together by ownership somehow, by the confines of what is owned.
Yeah.
Not if it is like the example we're talking about earlier of McDonald's, they say, well, it's nothing to do with us, it's the franchisees. Yeah, but the unions were saying, you control them.
Yeah.
And therefore, you must be responsible for the labor contract which they are able to sign.
And I suppose actually, really, ownership and control are very related concepts.
Of course they are, yes. And then the other challenge, which I think the technology poses for us, a very big challenge, is in terms of our notion of what is a multinational or transnational company. What is it? Because you see, if you look at the World Investment Report, which are the major publications on data and issues related to multinational companies, you will see that the major element which identifies them is foreign direct investment. It's the ownership of assets abroad.
Right.
In fact, the UNCTAD, which is responsible for the publication of the World Investment Report, they have developed an index of transnationalities, which takes account of ownership of assets abroad, employment abroad, and sales abroad, all three elements.
Right.
Now, the problem is that if we now look at high technology, in particular digital companies,
Yeah.
which is the latest technological development,
Yes.
like companies like Google, Facebook, Uber, and so on, the element of investment abroad, ownership of assets abroad, is very, very low.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the element of employment abroad is very low. What is very high is sales. Now, this is actually challenges our notion of what a multinational company is. But the bigger challenge is, of course, for governments, for the taxation of these companies.
Absolutely.
And there is obviously a lot of discussion on this. But there are also, as I say, it's not just for government, it's also, there are challenges for us as economists. And for me, I think the specific element which gives power to transnational companies are elements related to the regulatory regimes within nation states. And therefore those we should look at.
And I suppose the thing is that governments seem to be becoming less able at agreeing international standards than as time goes on.
They have become less and less, so yeah. Yes, I'm afraid so, yes.
So as potentially these agreements and shared rules, etc., break down, then in effect transnational companies are going to become more powerful going forward.
Well, it's like anyone bargaining with several other opposite sides. If they are divided, then obviously the big companies will benefit from it, and we have seen it.
Well, thank you very much, Grazia, for your time.
Thank you very much for giving me your
fascinating.
time. And yes, thank you.
Thank you very much.